Hello everyone, welcome to Business Live. Coming up tonight, government details new tax measures to shore up revenue for the economy hit by debt and a pandemic.
Levy. Sanitation and pollution levy. Government is proposing the sanitation and pollution levy, SPL, of 10 pesos.
Meanwhile, we are learning more details about the CARES program, which is pivotal for our economic transformation post-COVID-19. How effective will this program be? We'll have a panel ahead. Thanks for being with us tonight. Details right after this break. Welcome back, everyone, to Business Live. It's been a big day today, budget day, and well, gear up for new taxes and tax hikes. As anticipated, government has outlined new tax measures and is poised to increase taxes this year. These include a COVID-19 levy, sanitation and population levy, as well as a 10 peso increase on a litre of diesel and petrol through the energy sector levy. Now, the move is expected to shore up revenue for the economy, burdened by a rising debt stock and only just recovering from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's Caretaker Finance Minister Oseche Mensah-Bonsu making the announcement today in Parliament.
The impact of COVID-19 times indeed are hard for many of our people. However, it is important that we rebuild and strengthen our public finances to provide the resources to protect the lives and livelihoods of Ghanaians, deliver critical government services, and support the transformation of the economy. It will also ensure fiscal and debt sustainability. We have to do this ourselves, as no one will do it for us. Rebuilding our public finances requires us to implement some important fiscal measures to mobilize additional domestic revenue. Mr. Speaker, government recognizes that as a result of the impact of COVID-19, Speaker, as I've already said, rebuilding our public finances requires us to implement some important fiscal measures to mobilize additional domestic revenue. COVID-19 health levy. Sanitation and pollution levy. Government is proposing the sanitation and pollution levy, SPL, of 10 pesos. 10 pesos on the price per litre of petrol or diesel under the Energy Sector Levies Act, ESLA. It has become very necessary for government to consider a review of the energy sector levies. The Energy Sector Recovery Levy of 20 pesos per litre on petrol, diesel products under the ESLA is hereby submitted to this House for approval.
Well, government is targeting a growth rate of 5% this year. Much of the recovery plan is hinged on the 100 billion cedi economic revival blueprint that the CARES program. Now, Mr. Mensah-Bonsu highlighted the targets for this year.
Would implement reforms to increase revenue mobilization and the efficiency of public expenditures. D will revitalize and transform the economy through the implementation of the Ghana COVID-19 Alleviation, Revitalization and Enterprise Support Program, CARES. Build a robust financial sector to support growth and development. F, provide a supportive private sector environment for entrepreneurship, domestic businesses, and foreign direct investment to thrive. G, deepen structural reforms to make the machinery of government work more efficiently and effectively to support socio-economic transformation. H, implement reforms to increase revenue mobilization and the efficiency of public expenditures. Mr. Speaker, guided by the broad medium-term policy objectives, the following macroeconomic targets are set for 2021-2024 medium term. Overall GDP, real GDP growth rate to average 5.0%, non-oil real GDP to grow at an average of 4.9%, inflation to be within the target band of 8 plus or minus 2%, overall fiscal balance and primary balance to return to the Fiscal Responsibility Act threshold of fiscal deficit of 5% of GDP and a positive balance of by 2024, and gross international reserves to cover at least 4.0 months of imports.
So that was a bit of the budget statement presented to Parliament today. Joining me is Head of Financial Advisory at Deloitte Ghana, Yao Latte, also Chief Finance Officer and Lecturer at the Valley View University in the person of Dr. Williams Pepra. Thanks for joining us here on Business Live for this discussion. So I'll start with you, Yao. Government is desperate to fix our revenue challenges. Our revenue dropped by 13.6 billion cedis in 2020. It appears government had no choice but to introduce new taxes and increase some. Did they?
Yeah, thank you, Daryl, and good evening to you and our listeners. So it was expected largely that government was going to introduce some taxes. So I think during the stakeholder consultation and pre-budget reviews, some of the concerns that had been raised by stakeholders was government should look at or not overburdening existing taxpayers, but look at innovative ways of introducing new taxes that will find a way of bringing a lot more into the tax net. Government has been innovative, I must say, largely. If you look at the taxes that have been introduced, they are to some extent very innovative taxes, but there are some risk in those approaches or the measures that have been taken by government. And so I guess we can go into the details of that, but in essence, we were expecting government to do more than over-reliance on tax revenue.
Okay, you mentioned risks. Could you further tell us what that would means for us in terms of risks?
Yes, so I would say in the first place, a lot of the taxes that have been introduced are what we call indirect taxes, taxes that are going to be paid by the end consumer. And the first issue with that is that they are likely to have inflationary pressures. So if you recall, last year, for the first time in so many years, we went above the single-digit inflation. So quarterly inflation for previous years were all recorded below the single-digit inflation. Last year, because of the COVID and excess expenditure, we went above the single digits. So we were expecting that government was going to put measures that was going to avoid the inflationary pressures. But the tax that will be introduced, for instance, if you look at the energy sector recovery levy, which is going to be paid at the pump, people who, tractor drivers, ordinary users, road users, and others are going to pay. The effect of that is that people are going to put that on the price of output. So whatever they are going to sell, the price are going to be increased by that. Fares are going to increase automatically, and then price of goods and services are going to increase automatically. It's the same thing with health levy, which has also been introduced, 1% on VAT and another 1% on national health insurance. That is also going to have some form of inflationary pressure. We are also looking at sanitation and pollution taxes, what the minister or the acting minister termed as Bola taxes. That is also another indirect tax that has the potential of affecting our inflation. And then the last one is that government also intends to review our road tolls. So certainly at some point in the course of the year, we are going to have our tolls reviewed. So if you look at it generally, like I said, we have to exercise caution in the implementation of these taxes. Otherwise, the effect or the long-term effect is that we are going to have increase in price of goods and services because the users of these facilities or goods and services are going to ultimately increase their prices in order to avoid the burdensome effect of these taxes.
Talk about the burden. Dr. Pepra, could there have been other alternatives, especially as you're burdened with the pandemic?
Thank you very much for calling me at this time. I think that I've already mentioned earlier on in government should look at taxing the untaxed through the mobile money system. But in the budget, I did not see anything like that. As my colleague have mentioned, the exception of the financial sector cleanup tax of 5%, which is a sort of corporate tax, which is a direct tax. So there is not much difference that I've seen that the government tried to do. Listening to today's budget, I became more worried, especially when I heard of the cost of the banking sector cleanup cost of 21 billion cedis. This cost is even more than the budget that we have laid out. Probably, maybe going back, we should have thought through the process very well. So this is going to be a big challenge for us as a country, and government should prepare that people are going to come at them, especially citizens, because all these taxes are going to directly impact on us. They are indirect taxes.
Right, and already we are getting reaction on social media. People are not really happy about being taxed, especially with what they've had to go through throughout the past year to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to ask you, because one of the things that Deloitte has been proposing is to widen the tax net. So we've seen government integrate the TIN and national ID. Wouldn't that be enough for us to meet our revenue targets? I mean,
yes, so I think that's a very good point you've raised. So government has, over the last few years, strictly enforced the application and introduction of TIN for individuals. So as we speak, there are certain transactions or statutory transactions that you cannot do without a TIN. So if you don't have a tax identification number, what we call the TIN, you cannot, let's say, open a bank account, you cannot file your case at the court. That's a very good initiative. But as the politicians will say, unless it is linked to the total revenue collection from such individuals, the tax identification numbers do not really have any revenue impact. So you have a TIN, ask yourself, who follows you up at the end of the year to file your returns? Nobody does. So until we have a situation where the tax identification numbers that we have given to individuals, as in the working population in Ghana, is linked to our revenue collection effort, then the tax identification numbers that we're giving to people do not really have a revenue impact. So at the end of the year, we should be having a situation where the Registrar General of Companies or the Ghana Revenue Authority publishes the list of all 10 individuals who have 10 numbers in the country. So let's say you have 20 million Ghanaians who have 10 numbers or who have 10. And then out of the 20 million, only 5 million have filed their returns. So the rest, we follow them. Until government makes a conscious effort to do that, then the administration of the 10 numbers will not really have revenue impact.
All right, and there was an attempt at announcing some tax reliefs. For instance, commercial drivers, so as not to force an increase in transport fares, have been offered some tax waivers. But is that far-reaching enough?
Excellent. And I think that's one of the good things I see in this budget. And I would like to commend government for that, because it's one of the issues that came up in our stakeholder consultation during our pre-budget reviews. One of the points that were raised was that last year and the year before, when we were going through the effect of the COVID and stuff like that, the challenge we had was that government had some reliefs, government had some rebates, government had some incentives, but the incentives were not targeted. In this instance, we see a 30% rebate of taxes for certain industries in some sectors that have been identified. And the sectors that were identified included hospitality, tourism, restaurants, and the sectors that were hardly hit by the pandemic. And I think this targeted incentive package or tax rebate is a very good initiative, and we should laud government for it. Government has also suspended other taxes like the tax stamp that were supposed to be filed quarterly and others. I mean, these were all taxes that were creating what we call administrative nuances for businesses. And the suspension is also a good one. And I think we would like to commend government, particularly for the tax incentives and then tax rebate that is given to businesses.
Dr. Bepa, are you impressed by the tax waivers?
When it comes to the one given to vehicle owners, I am not very happy because these vehicle owners are going to pay through the petroleum tax 30 pesos. So let's ask ourselves, how much is the tax rebate when it comes to the vehicle income tax? It is peanut. So the transporters will still come at government and make noise. And also, when we look at the one the government has given to businesses, it is good to revamp those sectors, especially I am in education sector, so it is good, it will help us. But where we are suffering most, for me in my area, which is education, is what we pay in terms of the VAT. Now I have to revise the budget because the VAT is going to be increased. It's going to affect us. So we were hoping that some exemptions could have been given to certain areas, because if you go on the corporate tax angle, which is income tax, which is a direct tax, but then the government comes back to come and tax us through indirect tax, which is the one that really affects our cash flow, because that is what we need to survive. So some areas, especially the one given to transporters, I'm not happy. I am happy with the tax rebate given to hoteliers, and especially also the tax stand for small businesses. It's going to help them to relieve them to have some cash flow to operate. In a whole, I would say that as the minister mentioned in Isaiah 9 verse 10, it's going to be a difficult period because the bricks is going to be replaced by a dressed stone.
And we've had some
government must be prepared that the secondary will be coming to them.
We've heard some MPs in the minority say it's going to be a painful 1 year, but we've got a situation on our hand. We've got to deal with our debt numbers, and that's the reason why we are having to talk about an increment in taxes. Let's listen to Mr. Osei Mensah Bonsu paint the picture about our debt situation.
Mr. Speaker, the total debt stock mix was made up of a provisional figure of 141.780 billion for external debt and 149.83389 billion for domestic debt, accounting approximately for 48% and 51.4% of the total public debt stock, respectively. As a percentage of GDP, external domestic debt represented 36.99% and 39.09% respectively. Speaker, the total public debt has increased from 122 billion, that is 6.9 GDP, to 291.6 billion, that is 76.1% of GDP as at the end of December 2020. Included in the debt stock and the debt to GDP ratio at the end of 2020 are the following non-recurrent burdens that we had to deal with as a matter of urgency. One, the fiscal impact of COVID-19 is 19.7 billion. The cost of the financial sector cleanup is 21 billion Ghana cedis. Cost of excess capacity charges paid to IPPs, that's 12 billion Ghana cedis. The impact of the reduction in growth from an average of 7% to 0.9% in 2020. Speaker, if these expenditures are excluded and the drop in GDP growth in 2020 primarily attributable to COVID-19 pandemic is taken into account, the total stock of debt for 2020 would have been approximately 239.9 billion, implying a debt to GDP ratio of 58.7%.
And Dr. Pepa, despite this debt situation, next week we'll be on a Eurobond Ratio to raise $5 billion. We don't have any option.
For now, we don't have any option. That is where we have to go. If you look at the budget very well, I tried to put some numbers down, and I was trying to match the expenditure items with what the government is seeking to borrow. So the $5 billion, as the government says, $1.5 billion dollars of it is going to cover operational expenses. And then 3.5 is going to go into CAPEX, that is capital expenditure items. The government has mentioned that this is a year of growth, so the government will need money to go into that. So this is the option for government. And I've always said, once you borrow, you keep on borrowing to pay whatever you owe. But what I noticed in this year's external debt structure is that the figure mentioning as debt that to be borrowed is less than what we did last year. This year, the government is looking at about 41 million Ghana cedis in terms of borrowing, where we are seeking the 5 billion. So I'm sure that after this 5 billion, the government this year, I'm not expecting them to go out again and borrow. If you look at the structure, it's very well. Government is seeking to borrow more domestically than going out to borrow. The implication to us is that we are going to have a crowding effect.
Right.
So businesses will be competing with government in securing funding. So 2021 is going to be a very difficult year where citizens are going to be taxed, and then businesses are also going to suffer from raising funds.
Okay. Because
government is going to borrow from the projections roughly 25, almost 70% of their borrowing this year will come from domestic borrowing.
And now you have the final word on this one. I'd like us to touch on the CARES program because I know your institution has written about it. So having heard what the caretaker finance minister said today, are you convinced about how effectively this will help in transforming our economy and help us to reach the 5% growth targets that we are seeking to achieve?
So thank you very much, Daryl. I think just a word on the debt. So for the first time, government tried to explain the increased debt stock. So the debt stock increased by about 170 billion from 2016 to 2020. As we speak, the debt stock is about 296 billion Ghana cedis. And government tried to explain the COVID impact of the COVID impact on our debt, as well as the financial sector reforms and all. But if you look at the numbers, the explanation given only accounts for about 50 billion. There is still over 100 billion that has not been explained. And I think that that is something that government needs to look at it, because we are coming on the back of a rebased economy. And if our debt to GDP ratio is over 70, then there is a worrying situation. I guess points there to conclude on the debt is that government should look at diversifying our borrowing sources. The capital markets, like the Eurobond we are going, is becoming expensive. And so if we can diversify our borrowing sources, that would be very helpful.
We just have about 30 seconds.
Yes, to make on the CARES program. I think the CARES program has gotten to the second phase, which is the long-term projects that government planned under the CARES program. So the short-term effects, short-term incentives for business have all been utilized. Now government intends to establish a development bank, which is a very good plan, because if you go to East Africa, their development banks give loans of less than 10%, as opposed to the 21%, 30% that we are seeing here. Also, fast-track digitization is another invention or something that government intends to implement significant under the CARES program. I guess these are all good initiatives. but then what was lacking was how they were going to be financed.
All right, yeah, I would leave it there and continue the conversation next week. I'm sure it will be in the news as well as we continue to, analyze the budget. Thank you, gentlemen, for